So we've just heard about what it takes to shift an entire industry. And we've also had a little bit of a look at the role that policy can play, and it's clear that both need to be aligned. In this next conversation, which I'm really excited to bring to you, we'll be looking at people building buildings very differently, and often in some of the most tough conditions as well. From informal housing to disaster response and rethinking city streets, these voices are the ones that are showing us what resilience really looks like in practice. So to join me for this conversation, I have three incredible individuals. I have the director of Tito Brazil, Camille Jordan, the CEO and founder of Conti Design Studio, Carla Gautier, and the director Pavillon de l'Arsenal, Marion Waller. Please welcome them all to the stage. Hello, 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 ladies. Welcome to the stage. I kind of want to begin by setting the scene for everybody with each of you. And it'd be really helpful if you could each introduce yourself through the lens of what you bring to the conversation with your work that connects you to sustainable and resilient construction. I'll start with you, Camilla.
Hi, everyone. I'm very happy to be here. I flew in from São Paulo in Brazil, and we work at Teto, is an international Latin American organization present in 18 countries, and we focus on working with the most marginalized informal settlements in the region. So we have different stages of informal settlements, and our work we focus on the settlements that have the most crucial housing emergency, where people are living on dirt floors, wooden shacks, and really at the forefront of all of the impacts of the climate crisis. So we work together with the residents, always together, and young volunteers to tackle these problems.
Incredible work that you're doing. Marion, can you tell us a little bit about what you're doing?
Hi, so my name is Marion Waller, and I'm director of Pavillon de l'Arsenal, which is the Center for Architecture and Urban Planning in Paris. So I'm here to talk about Paris and how Paris is being transformed right now, and how we can mix ecology, urban planning, and patrimony in Paris.
Wonderful. And finally, Carla, a little bit about you and the work that you're doing.
Of course, thank you for being here. My name is Carla Gautier, and the construction industry poses 40% of the carbon emissions in the world. That's a huge number, but I choose to see that number as a huge opportunity for change as well, for positive change. So at Conti Design, what we do is we build housing and commercial solutions in a modular way using upcycled and recycled materials to lower our carbon footprint and really create spaces that are resilient to hurricanes, earthquakes, and fires, but that also regenerate the spaces in which we live in. Now, I know that we cannot do this alone, so one thing that we're trying to do right now as well is create partnerships so that we can expand our mission around the world and just, make a bigger impact to really reduce that 40% into hopefully zero very soon.
I'm incredibly excited about the work all three of you are doing. Often when we talk about building the future, we have this futuristic view of buildings and exciting new innovations that are coming through. But what we don't often talk about is who's being left out of this conversation when we're thinking about the future of construction, and why that causes a problem and the sorts of things we should really be focusing on. So Carla, your work is very deeply kind of embedded in who's left out. And so I'd love to hear from you. When you think about the future of construction and innovation, who do you think's normally left out that you're bringing back into the fold?
So that's actually a really interesting question, because the answer is really unfortunate. It is the majority of us. We are the ones being left out, and the reason is because even when people are convinced that they want to do the right thing, that they want to build their home or their business in the correct way, most of us need to finance it. Most of us do not have boatloads of cash laying around there to be able to finance a whole construction. So therefore, you have to go to the bank, you have to find investors, and that process is so difficult, especially when it comes to the banks, that even when the person is convinced, the bank basically tells them no, or they tell them, okay, like I'll finance this little bit of it. So in the end, they stop their innovation, they stop what they want to do, and that's the majority of us. So I think one of the things that we really need to fix is the financing towards sustainability, so that we can actually innovate and create better built environment.
I'm going to pick you back up on that point a little bit later on, because I do think it's quite important. We think futuristic, but actually there's a real finance element that we do need to consider here and now, and none of us are immune to that. Camilla, from your perspective, you're working with people who arguably are generally, by their nature, not thought of when it comes to construction. Can you maybe share a little bit more about that?
So actually, around the world, we have 2 billion people who live in informal settlements. 2 billion people.
Okay, wait, let me say that.
Yeah.
2 billion with a B, not million, billion people in informal settlements. What does that mean?
That means that most people are, by default, living in precarious housing conditions, either because they had to build their own houses through auto construction, usually throughout many years, where they have to save a lot of money. They usually also work informally, so they have, a very large fluctuation of cash income. And then the people that Teto works with specifically are the ones who are completely, even when we think about finance, I mean, these people are not even in banks. I mean, they really are living day to day because they're living on dirt floors, completely, anything that can happen to their house, the next day they can be gone. So we really, and with climate change, it's getting worse and worse. And these people are the ones who are feeling it the most. So when we think about, the future of construction, the future of our cities, we have to break completely this logic of having segregated cities, of building walls, of building condos. I mean, I always say that, at least in Brazil and Latin America, it is very common that we've learned how to build condominiums, but we haven't learned how to build cities, really. Because most people, even when they ascend to a house, they prefer, or they're sold that the idea they're safer behind a wall, they're safer behind a security camera, and that doesn't build cities, that doesn't build security, that doesn't build resilience. So we really have to think about what is the logic of cities that we want to preserve and scale up, and what is the logic that we have to break immediately so that we can't continue doing the same mistakes.
As you were speaking, I could see Marion. That deserves a clap, doesn't it? As you were speaking, I could see Marion in the background nodding her head, because it's almost from one extreme to the next. We're talking cities, and we have a city, but even in cities, we have people who are not thought about so much as we think about the building of cities. Can you maybe speak to that?
Yeah, we still have so much to do to involve everyone in city building, and to ensure that everybody feels really welcome in public space and in every building. So in Paris, what has been done in the previous years is really to, for example, to rethink public space starting by children, because very often the streets were made for one type of person, which is a non-handicapped person, which is a person with a car. And if you start by other point of views, like children, like handicapped people, then you look at the streets differently, and you realize what are the real priorities. And that's how we transform public space in Paris. We have this project called Streets for Children. We transform streets in front of schools, and we make it a green street where children are really safe. And so I think we have to start by this vulnerable point of view to transform our city.
I think vulnerable is probably the word that's underpinning some of this conversation. As we start to look at buildings and start to look at construction, it's very easy to sometimes forget the vulnerable, regardless of the city landscape that we're speaking about and the way their viewpoint on the world. Where do you currently, Camilla, was there something to add?
Yeah, I was just going to say...
I spotted it out of the corner of my eye.
I was just going to add that one of the things that I've been learning a lot in the last few years is that if we start with public policy that focuses on the most vulnerable in our society, if we focus on constructing cities and buildings for children, for handicapped, for women, then everyone else is already contemplated. It's like if you have a sieve, if a public policy has a sieve and the holes are too big, people keep falling out because they're not contemplated by this public policy. But if the sieve is very thin, if it thinks about the most vulnerable person in that society, then everyone else is automatically contemplated. And we don't design policy like that. Not yet, or in very few places. So I think, I always like to think about how thin is this sieve that of this public policy that we have, or process or logic that we're operating in cities.
That's such a beautiful analogy. Like, how many holes are in the sieve and who's just dropping all the way through it. And speaking of policy planning and regulation, what do you think is actually holding us back from building much more resilient, inclusive cities? Marion, I'm going to start with you. I mean, you're doing lots of stuff here in Paris that's really pivotal and quite revolutionary, but that's not the case everywhere, is it?
It takes a lot of courage and political will to change things. I have been working for 10 years in Paris and on urban planning. And 10 years ago, when we asked, for example, for timber building or for building in stone or having green roofs, a lot of people told us it was impossible. They told us it's not possible in Paris, it's too complicated. And now it's the new rule. So it shows that in 10 years, you can really change the rules of the game. That's what I observed in Paris, and we were able to do it because there was a clear political vision aligned with, of course, economic interests, and together we found solutions, and with architects and with NGOs, we found solutions. So I think when there is a clear vision, we find the solutions.
I love what you said that, because what that tells us is there's hope. That tells us that even when it's not quite right, there's hope that we can change it. Carla, I know when we spoke, you had some words to say about regulation and planning, and where it sometimes does the opposite of what you need it to do.
Too often, unfortunately. Yeah, I guess, like, I was speaking before a little bit about how when people, even when they want to, they can't access financing. It's like practically impossible to finance any alternative architecture. So because of all the red tape, and there's just so many steps to that regulation. But the biggest thing is that let's say that you're trying to finance your home, right? We are working with an archaic system that is based on appraisals that are based on comparables. That is literally the opposite of innovation, because what they're saying to you is you have to build what has already been built, even though we know that it's being built the wrong way, and it's being built in a way that is destroying our planet. So when my clients come to me and they're like, I want to build my home, I want to be better for the environment, I don't want my home to have a positive carbon footprint, I'm like, great, let's do this. And they're like, okay, wait, but I can't just pay for it cash. I need to be able to finance it. And the bank's like, well, sorry, but there's no other buildings like this, so you can't innovate. So it just becomes kind of a dead cycle where people want to do something good, but then policy and regulations and all this red tape are literally stopping them from doing it. So what we need to do is get rid of all that red tape and start allowing and giving the tools for people to be able to do what they want and to be able to do the right thing.
We talk about finance and innovation, and often when we're thinking about finance, we're thinking of financing for the innovation, and not necessarily what you're speaking about, Carla, which is we have something innovative, but how do people get the finance to buy the home? And most people are buying homes with mortgages, and if mortgages are built on comparables, and what you're designing is something that doesn't exist right now, there isn't anything to compare it to. And so we need to rethink that. That's one thing on the table. Camilla, what about you? What do you think? Where do you think policy needs a little bit of a nudge along?
I want to take the word that Marion said, which is courage, which I think specifically, I mean, I'm very biased, of course, but I think in our organization, we are very courageous because we focus on the silent housing emergency that is happening at the same time that we believe in long-term definite solutions. But there is so much taboo around, for example, transitional solutions. So if you think about the 2 billion people who live in informal settlements, and I did this really quick math in Brazil, if we were to start and urbanize one favela a week starting today, we would take 230 years to include all of these settlements into our cities. 230 years.
230 years.
And the reality is that we design policy for the long term, but today, there's a lot of people today that will fear the rain that is going to come at night. That the fear that the heat is going to, or the lack of ventilation is causing something to their children. So there is a silent housing emergency going on, and not only in Brazil, in many other countries. And we need to start also discussing, okay, in the meantime, since urbanization takes so long when it's powered by the government or by our societies, what is happening to these people in the meantime? Because today, people are being born and dying in wooden shacks, and no one is doing anything about it. And as a nonprofit, we want to partner with governments. We want to partner up to be able to scale up. But there's so much taboo around transitional housing, for example, because people say, oh, it's not definite. Yes, it's not definite, but do you prefer to let someone live in a dirt floor wooden shack, or you prefer to give this person some dignity so that they can sustain how, as a society, we're failing because we're leaving 2 billion people outside of being complete citizens, actually. Because you don't have water, you don't have sanitation, your house is horrible. So how can you even feel as a citizen if you are not accessing your basic rights?
So there's an opportunity to think not just long term, but we actually need to think about what can we do right now where policy can help support the unsupported and the vulnerable.
And the financing around that,
and
too.
The financing. Carl, I can see you jumping back in.
I just wanted to say, it's Maslow's pyramid. We cannot fix society if we don't have a proper, dignified roof over our heads. So it's, we have to start at the base level. We need food, we need housing. Then we can think about everything else.
Absolutely true. We've talked a lot about what's wrong, but you're on this stage because you're all doing some amazing work. And so we have some real hope for what's possible. Marion, maybe you can share some example of where policy design and collaboration has actually helped to accelerate. Where should we be putting our focus, putting our attention, perhaps getting some more funding behind because there's already some momentum?
The good thing with cities is that you can very quickly show what ecology is and how we can change things. For example, in Paris, we look at every type of space, like schoolyards, like streets, like buildings, courtyards, and we think, okay, how can we transform those spaces with architects, with urban planners, with all the people who dream and act? And for example, if you take a schoolyard, very often in Paris, before it was like mineral, only 1 or 2 trees, and a lot of space for young boys playing soccer, less space for young girls. And so what we do is that we transform the schoolyards into gardens. That's a very simple public policy that works very well. Because if you transform a schoolyard into a garden, it changes everything in what's the atmosphere for children, what types of games they do. And so that's a good thing, with cities, is that you can really have a utopia, but directly on the ground. So that's why I love architecture and urban planning. And it's our role, the place I run, Pavillon de l'Arsenal, which is a museum, is to show with books, with exhibitions, how we can transform things. And we will do an entire exhibition about schools in June to show how every space in schools can be transformed for children, for example.
I love moving from functional to we can bring function, play, design all into the same space so that people exist in those spaces in a very different way. Camilla, you shared earlier about people who are really underrepresented, not thought about in a housing emergency. And we've spoken a lot about what that feels like and how that's really quite traumatic. But there's hope. There's hope. Can you give us some examples of what is possible when we get it right?
Of course. I mean, we are actually, as an organization this year, we will be reaching 1.5 thousand people with housing solutions, transitional housing solutions in Latin America. And I think, and we do that by mobilizing youth. So everyone that goes through our organization is also seeing the city from a different perspective, is working together, hand to hand, shoulder to shoulder with the residents from these informal settlements, and thinking about, to the future, what can I do? I mean, I was a volunteer, so I actually did that process. I started as a volunteer and completely changed my life because of what I experienced during the organization. But we have, in other countries in Latin America, unfortunately not in Brazil yet, but we have governments who are partnering more and more, also because of the climate crisis is getting more often, the incidence of hurricanes and fires and everything is getting, we have more often of these incidents, and so we have some countries like in Argentina and Mexico where Techo is partnering with governments to support these families with transitional housing. And that immediately also gives a direct path in informal settlements to government, which are often completely cut out. So it's a first step to bring this, to bring dignity, and then continue working. Of course, you have to keep working. You have to change policy so that these settlements, wherever possible, because you also have a lot of people living in risk areas, but wherever possible to actually urbanize these settlements and bring them into our cities.
So the settlements exist, and there's a route for governments to plug right into it and start to run with it right now. So that's exciting. Carla, give us some examples. I need good news stories here. Give us some examples of some amazing work that you're doing as well.
This is actually a great moment for that question because we are currently building the first ever fully self-sustainable hotel in Puerto Rico. And the great thing is that it's going to be a network. It's going to be built out of shipping containers. So we're upcycling. We're bringing our carbon footprint down to 80% in our building. We are collecting rainwater. We are using solar energy for all of our energy. And not only that, but while Puerto Rico continues to be the paradise that it is, people will be able to learn, enjoy, and retreat in these places. But when disaster hits, because it will hit again, these places will be the only thing standing. So they're going to turn into emergency hubs. So this process has actually been super interesting because it has forced us to bring in, like we're currently finishing our fund, raising our fund to be able to build it. We're ready to build, we're in permitting. But to be able to get to this point, we have had to collaborate with all of the teams from the beginning, with the financing team, with the construction team, and with the design team. So it's been kind of a different process than what we're used to in architecture a lot of the times. But also, I think it's the best way to create these types of buildings, because we need to make sure that we are able to monetize sustainability in the end, so that it can actually be sustainable, so that we can keep making it that way, and so that we can keep convincing investors and banks as well to be able to do this. So I think this is a really cool example that we're working on right now, and hopefully next year, if we see here, I'll be showing some pictures of the built hotel, and you guys are all invited to come visit as well.
Actually, I just forgot to say something super important, but we've been designing inside of the UN Race to Zero campaign and the UN Climate Champions. We are part in Latin America of the Roof of Our Heads initiative. And with this initiative, we're actually prototyping many different types of resilient homes around Latin America, and Brazil is one of them. So we've been doing workshops with the communities to think about and hear about what actually are the most crucial things in their day-to-day lives in terms of the climate crisis. And then we've redesigned the home that we built for many years to be a new resilient house. And this house is actually has been co-designed with the communities, and we're hoping that it will be also widely implemented with the support of governments.
So there's lots of incredible solutions here. I do encourage you all to go and check out each of these organizations and the incredible work that they're doing. One last question as we wrap up. If you could shift one thing, I love asking people this question. If you could shift one thing, it could be a policy, it could be a mindset, it could be a process, something that would accelerate the way that we transition to more sustainable construction. What would it be, Camilla?
I think it's the mindset around transitional solutions. I think we have to be real about it. We have to look reality in the eyes, put our feet where we need to be, and actually say, yes, we need definite solutions, we need permanent housing, but in the meantime, we need to look at what's happening right now, because right now people are dying from where they're living, and that can't be natural. That can't be something that we just, as a society, be it here or be it in Brazil or in Mexico, is okay. We can't be as a society. And can I say one other thing? Is also that I think Change Now could have more discussions with different partners, so more NGOs, more governments, with business, because we actually need to collaborate between these three pillars to get better solutions, to have better implementations. So I hope next year you have more of these other players also here on stage discussing.
So more collaboration and a different mindset around transitional housing. Marion, what would be the mindset policy? What shifts do you think people need to make?
Many things, but one important thing is to transform all empty spaces, like all empty offices. There are a lot here in the region, into housings, because we still have so many people sleeping in the streets in Paris or elsewhere, and we have millions of empty square meters of office buildings. So I think we have to transform urgently those spaces into housing.
So transformation of building, urgent transformation of office spaces into buildings. And finally, Carla, what one shift do you want to leave us with?
It's hard to pick one because I think mindset is huge because it trickles down to everything else. But I'd like to focus a little bit more on the policy and the regulations. Because if we don't do that, like, I truly believe that the world is ready. People are ready to take on these solutions. But if regulation stops them from doing it, then there's nowhere we can keep going. It's a complete contradiction. So, like, for example, like in Puerto Rico, I'm pretty sure nobody in Puerto Rico thinks that climate change is a hoax, because we've all gone through it. When Hurricane Maria hit in 2017, it did not matter how much money you had at that point, because there was nothing to buy in the supermarket, zero. Literally the aisles in the supermarket were completely empty. So unfortunately, we had a slap in the face that made people realize what is going on. And now people are ready to go. They're ready to change. They're ready to rebuild. They have to rebuild because we lost 70,000 homes in one night. But now they want to rebuild in the proper way. So if we don't change policy, if we don't pave the path and give people these tools to be able to do that, we cannot help with disaster relief. We cannot help with our own homes, and we cannot help with the businesses that are going to flourish and that are going to continue to come up because we cannot build the proper way. So I think policy and regulation is really the biggest thing that we need to change. People are ready. We need to just give them the tools to do it.
Beautiful words to end on. Thank you, ladies, so much for your time here on the stage. Give them a warm round of applause. So that actually concludes this session. My name's been Lavalda Vincenzi. Thank you so much for joining, and enjoy the rest of your time here at Change Now. See you soon.